What's up guys, Agent here again with another build video, and today we are making the Ice Mage build official. We are doing a full-length build video on the Frost Mage, which I have decided to name the Ringil. So this is basically a Magicka Warden build that focuses in on basically just maximizing the amount of frost damage you can do. So as you can expect, it's going to do compared to like your typical Magicka Warden build, like Nature's Fury, like the one that I have. I believe it's called Nature's Fury, or something like that. It's not going to be nearly as strong. Frost damage is not in any way, shape, and form kind of equivalent to flame damage or shock damage. In fact, frost staves are definitely by far more tanking than actual DPS, but some people are interested in playing a frost mage, whether that's for role-playing purposes or just because they want to do something a little bit different, or they want to do something off meta instead. So I decided to just kind of make this video for those of you guys out there who might be interested in playing this sort of role. Again, it's not something I would recommend bringing to vet trials. You can probably do like the vet Craglorns with this build with the amount of DPS that you're able to pull, but I would not recommend bringing this to something like vet Maw, vet Halls, or even the mini trials Asylum or Cloud Rest, just because you're just not going to be doing as much DPS as everybody else, and you're going to have a very, very hard time convincing people to take you along if you're using ice staves because of sort of that stigma that is applied with ice staves right now. So yeah, in terms of overall DPS, you're going to be looking at probably around anywhere between like 15 to 20k less than your typical standard Magicka Warden build. So without further ado, let's go ahead and get started off here with our gear, and we'll go over everything else you need to know to basically recreate this build yourself. So starting things off, again, this is focused on maximizing frost damage. So we're not really focusing in on sort of maximizing DPS or anything like that. We're just basically looking for sets that basically allow us to maximize our overall frost damage. So for our Maelstrom set, there's only one option. That's going to be Iceheart. This is a base game set that you can get from Dire Frost Keep. So the two-piece, when you deal critical damage, you have a 20% chance to gain a damage shield that absorbs, in this case, 8600 damage for 6 seconds. And while the damage shield holds, you deal 12, in this case, 1201 frost damage to all enemies within 5 meters of you every second. So overall, pretty easy proc conditions. It's just crit damage. Doesn't have to be necessarily direct damage or damage over time. As long as it's a critical hit, you have that 20% chance to proc it as long as it is off cooldown. Now, this is the only Mage helm set in the game that deals frost damage right now. So if you want to basically play as your Frost Warden, Iceheart is the only sort of Mage helm set you have to choose from. Now for your body set, you have a couple of options here. So I'm going with Ysgramor's Birthright. So this is a light armor set that you can get, I believe it is from Riften. Let me double check real quick. Yes, so it is from the Rift. So it is a light armor set, so you can farm it yourself, or you can buy it off of guild traders. So as you can see here, it gives you spell crit, max magicka, spell damage, and it also adds 400 spell damage to your frost damage abilities. So in terms of our actual abilities, that will buff our Blockade of Frost, that'll buff Winter's Revenge, that'll buff Ice Clench. I don't know if it's Ice or Frost Clench, but it'll buff Destructive Clench, and it'll also buff the Ice portion of Force Pulse. So it basically gives us a lot of spell damage to our main damaging abilities. And then for our front bar set, we're going with Icy Conjurer. So this is a new set. This is dropped from, again, let me just double check here because it is a new set and it's not normally a set that I would run. Icy Conjurer. So this is from Frostvault. It's a light armor set, so you do need to have access to the Wrathstone DLC in order to grab this set. So this is a dungeon set, so you're gonna have to farm this yourself. So I have it on the jewelry and the weapons, and I would recommend running Icy Conjurer on your weapons because it is a proc set versus the static bonus from Ysgramor. So you just want to make sure you have your proc set on your front bar here. So again, this is a dungeon set, so you have to farm this yourself. So you will have to go through the whole dungeon or get lucky with chests in order to get the ice staff. So the 5-piece, when you apply a minor debuff to your enemy, you summon a non-reflectable ice wraith that will charge into your enemy, dealing in this instance 28,568 frost damage over 8 seconds. This effect can occur every 12 seconds. Now, the proc condition might seem like it is pretty limiting. It's a minor debuff, but you have to remember that enchants also apply minor debuffs as well, or at least some enchants do. The shock damage enchant will apply minor vulnerability through concussed, and the frost damage enchant will actually apply minor maim through chilled. So we are able to proc Icy Conjurer as long as we are using, as you can see here, that frost damage enchant there, because it will help proc minor maim, which is a minor debuff. So you'll be able to proc Icy Conjurer pretty much every 12 seconds. And then for our back bar, we're still going with the Maelstrom's Ice Staff. It's just going to be the strongest option if you want to sort of maximize the overall DPS. You can, of course, double bar Icy Conjurer if you don't have Maelstrom's Ice Staff. So we have an Infused Absorb Magicka enchant on our Maelstrom's Ice Staff. So Magicka Wardens on a Frost Mage, you can't heavy attack to sustain, so you pretty much have to rely on things like Spell Sim, Absorb Magicka enchants, your food, in order to kind of maximize your overall sustain. So you can't really heavy attack because you will end up taunting. The only way you can avoid that is just by not taking the Tri-Focus passive, which is an option if you just intend on just playing Ice Mage the whole time. For our front bar, we have an Infused Frost damage enchant, so Frozen Weapon enchant. And for our jewelry, we have 3 Bloodthirsty with 3 spell damage. You can go with Infused if you would prefer. It's kind of up to you which one you want to go for. Bloodthirsty is going to be stronger overall, but Infused is a very good option as well, especially in certain fights where Execute is not going to be quite as important as just a burst damage that Infused is going to give you. But generally speaking, Bloodthirsty is going to be the strongest option. And finally, for our armor, we have all Divines with all max Magicka enchants. Now, I do want to make note of one other set that you might want to consider running if you don't have the ability to get Icy Conjurer, so you don't have Wrathstone, for example, and that is going to be Winterborn. So Winterborn is a set that is found from Maelstrom Arena. So unfortunately, you cannot buy this off of guild traders, but if you have access to the Hrothgar DLC and you don't have access to Wrathstone, then you can run Winterborn instead on the front bar rather than Icy Conjurer. So the difference between those two is that Winterborn gives you Magicka regen, while Icy Conjurer gives you spell penetration. Winterborn also doesn't do quite as much DPS, so when you deal damage to the cold damage ability, you have an 8% chance to summon an Ice Pillar that deals, in this case, 9,063 frost damage to all enemies in a 3-meter radius. This Ice Pillar persists for 2 seconds, and boosts the movement speed of all enemies within the radius by 60 seconds. So generally speaking, not very strong. So it's a proc chance, so it doesn't have a cooldown, so you can basically proc it every single time you deal damage if you RNG gods smile upon you, but it doesn't deal quite as much damage compared to Icy Conjurer. It's kind of a little bit RNG dependent, but from my experience and my testing, it does seem like Icy Conjurer is at the very least more consistent overall when it comes to overall DPS. So that's really your only real option when it comes to just maximizing your overall frost damage. You could also run something like Julianos instead, but then you have 2 5-piece static bonuses, which doesn't really drive really well. So I always try to get a proc set as your front bar set, just because then you don't have to worry about necessarily things carrying over to your back bar or not. Now going over our character sheet, I am a Dark Elf. If you want to maximize your overall DPS, you can be a High Elf or a Dark Elf. They both get 258 spell damage. The High Elves get a little bit more max Magicka. They get 2,000 max Magicka. Dark Elves get 1,875 max Magicka instead. Those are going to be your best 2 options for race. Your third best option is going to be Breton. So they get 2,000 max Magicka, and then they get 100 Magicka regen and 7% cost reduction to all Magicka-based abilities. So Bretons get a lot of sustain, so very, very helpful on this particular build. So running a Breton might not be a terrible idea, but if you still want to maximize your overall damage, then Altmer or Dark Elves are going to be your best option. Now, in terms of attributes, we have 64 points into Magicka. Again, we want to maximize as much damage as we possibly can. And we are running Iceheart, so we do have a damage shield that is kind of protecting us on top of any other damage shield that we might already be running. So you don't necessarily need to put points into health if you so desire, but if you want to, you can. It's kind of up to you if you want to put points into health or not. For our Mundus Stone, we are going with the Shadow. Shadow has been buffed in Wrathstone to provide 13% base crit damage instead of 9% in Murkmire. So it's a very, very powerful Mundus Stone right now, so we're just going to be running the Shadow. You can also run the Thief if you so desire, but the Shadow is a little bit higher, does a little bit better in my experience. Finally, for our Parse, we are going to be using Ysgramor, also known as Ghastly Eyeball. However, in an actual raid, you would be running either Witchmother's Potent Brew or Clockwork Sister's Filet for the additional health. So Ghastly Eyeball just allows us to kind of simulate getting blue food as well as orbs on cooldown. Clockwork Sister's Filet and Witchmother's Potent Brew will give us the additional health that we need, give us a little bit less Magicka than blue food, but it'll also give us 219 Magicka regen, which is going to be very helpful for overall sustain. But for the Parse, we are going with Ghastly Eyeball. Now going over our skills: Force Pulse, Frost Clench, Blue Betty, Bird of Prey, Inner Light, and Northern Storm. This is on our front bar here, and Force Pulse is going to be our spam bull. There really isn't any spam bull that does just pure frost damage, so Force Pulse is the closest that we're going to be able to get to sort of a spam bull that's kind of focused in on frost damage. Frost Clench, obviously, for the dot, Blue Betty for sustain, Bird of Prey for the Berserk, Inner Light for the Magicka, Northern Storm also from the Magicka, but you can also use this as a primary ultimate if you'd like. It doesn't deal quite as much damage as Icy Rage, but it does provide major protection while you are within it, so it might be useful in some situations. Then for our back bar, we have Winter's Revenge, Blockade of Frost, Spell Symmetry, because our sustain is absolutely garbage, so we do need the additional Magicka sustain from Spell Symmetry. Elemental Drain, this is where we'd put our shield, so you can go with either Dampen Magic or Harness Magicka, whichever one you prefer. Dampen Magic will give you larger shield, so I prefer that one, but Harness Magicka does give you some Magicka back when you get hit by any sort of spell damage. Then we have Bird of Prey for the Minor Berserk again, and then we have Icy Rage. This is the Destro Staff ultimate. This is going to be our primary ultimate that we're going to be using here. Now going over our CP points. CP cap has not changed between Murkmire and Wrathstone, so it is still 810. It gives us 270 points to put across each of our 3 different constellation types. Starting off with the green CP, 75 Arcanist, 75 Tenacity. That gives us 120 points to put into remaining nodes, really however you'd like. So I have 40 Shadow Ward, 40 Tumbling, and 40 Warlord. Now if you want, you can push Arcanist and Tenacity all the way up to 100% if you would like. 100 points, that'll give you the additional 1 percentage point to each. And that gives you 70 points rather than 120 points to play around with. Now for our blue CPs, now if you are using Icy Conjurer, you don't need to put as many points into Spell Erosion because Icy Conjurer does come with a Spell Penetration bonus on the 4-piece. You will lose it while you're on your back bar, but that's not that big of a deal. You should be on your front bar for most of the fight anyways. We have 72 Elfborn, 64 Ally Expert, 5 into Spell Erosion, 9 into Staff Expert, 72 into Master at Arms, and 48 into Thaumaturge. If you are running Winterborn instead, you will need to put some more points into Spell Erosion because you do not have the you won't have the additional spell pen anymore. So in this case, you would drop Master at Arms down to 66, Thaumaturge down to 37. Be able to bump Spell Erosion up to 22 that way. And then for our red CPs, so this is a one-size-fits-most approach. So this will give you very good mitigation across all pieces of content, but it will not maximize your mitigation across any single piece of content. So you will need to shift some red CP points around depending on the content that you intend on running. I have 81 Ironclad, 61 Thickskin, and 64 into both Hardy and Elemental Defender. Alright, so that is pretty much it for our build stuff. So now let's go ahead and talk about our rotation. One thing I forgot to mention that I thought of is that if you are able to sustain without using Spell Sim, then you can replace Spell Sim with a source of minor force. So that would either be Channel Acceleration from the Psijic Order skill line, or if you're able to be within melee range, which ideally you should be, so that way you can run Iceheart, it's going to be Rearming Trap. So because you are running Iceheart in order to maximize your sort of frost damage, you do need to be within melee range in order to make the most use out of it, because it does only have a 5-meter radius. So ideally you'd be running Rearming Trap rather than Channel Acceleration. Now rotation is pretty simple. We only have 4 abilities to keep track of: Blockade, Winter's Revenge, Frost Clench, and Force Pulse. You have 3 dots, 1 spamble, and that's pretty much it. Everything else is pretty much there for the passives. So obviously Bird of Prey is for the Minor Berserk. You don't really need to use Inner Light at all. Blue Betty you also need to maintain for your sustain, but that's a longer duration, so it's pretty easy to sustain over, keep track of overall. And of course we are using Icy Rage as our ultimate because that does more damage than Northern Storm does. So this is a little bit of a dynamic rotation because our dots don't line up very well. So Blockade is 8 seconds, Winter's Revenge is 12 seconds, and Frost Clench is 8 seconds. So it's a little bit off key a little bit, and then Blue Betty is 27 seconds. So not really lining up all too well. So it's a little bit dynamic. So I'll kind of show you guys what I mean by a dynamic rotation. Basically means because our dots don't line up very well, I should say Frost Clench actually lasts for 10 seconds. So I can't really use Winter's Revenge again because then I end up overcasting it. That is, I'll basically be using it before the duration actually expires, which is a drain on my Magicka, as well as an overall DPS loss because I'm not able to get it to kind of hit for its full duration. That's kind of the idea behind a dynamic rotation. Is you will not be using abilities one right after another like a static rotation does. You're going to be keeping an eye on the actual duration remaining and use that instead. So because because Winter's Revenge has a 12-second duration. It's a little bit off center from Blockade, which has 8, and then Frost Clench, which is 10 seconds. So just kind of keep that in mind. A dynamic rotation is going to give you more DPS because you don't have to overcast your dots. You're basically maximizing the amount of damage that your dots are able to do. I do highly recommend if you are on PC to get something like Action Duration Reminder or Srendar in order to kind of keep track of your dots. Now, with all that said and done, let's go ahead and do our 6-man dummy parse so you guys get an idea of the DPS we are able to pull. Again, do not expect to be pulling monstrous amounts of DPS. As kind of a reminder, the Magicka DPS build that I have for the Magicka Warden, that's more meta, that is able to pull close to 50k self-buffs. So you're not going to be able to hit 50k self-buff on this build. You'd be lucky if you managed to hit 40k self-buff on this build. So just bear that in mind, and that's why I don't really recommend running this build on anything harder than the Vet Craglorn trials. You can certainly try, but you're definitely not going to be able to pull your fair share in those trials, and it ends up not really being all that fair for your teammates. Remember that even if you feel like you're doing well, you have to keep in consideration that you are doing group content, and you have to take in consideration the other 11 people that are playing with you. So you can't really be selfish in group content. You kind of have to take in consideration everybody else's sort of feelings and kind of be a little bit of fairness involved. If someone's carrying you, that's not really fair for the team. So just bear that in mind before you say, I want to bring my Frost Warden into Halls of Fabrication. Certainly can if your raid lead is okay with it, but again, you kind of have to think, well, what about your teammates? Somebody else is going to be carrying your DPS because you're not going to be able to pull the DPS. That's sort of like the minimum DPS for Halls of Fabrication, for example. So enough about that. Let's go ahead and just do our 6-man dummy parse. You can already see that, yes, we are proccing Icy Conjurer. That was the Ice Wraith that went off. Oh, as for Spell Sim, you can pretty much use it whenever you feel like you need some extra Magicka. Just bear in mind when you're going to be using Spell Sim because it does use your health in order to restore Magicka. So just obviously don't want to use it at an inopportune time. Just be a little bit mindful of when you use it. That way you don't accidentally piss off your healers. So you can see here our drain is pretty terrible right now, and we're not really able to cast Spell Sim again because we don't really have the health to do so. Again, if you don't have the Tri-Focus passive, you can by all means use heavy attacks to help yourself sustain. But if you do have the Tri-Focus passive, then you can't use heavy attacks to sustain because then you will taunt the boss. That's obviously not something you want to have happen. Oh, I am going to recast my Betty a couple of times, that way I can get some Magicka back, or health back, I should say, to use balance a little bit more. Almost there. As you can see here, overall DPS is not nearly as good as on a typical Magicka Warden. Alright, so there we go. That is our overall DPS. Managed to pull just shy, just over 35k here. So again, as a reference, our Magicka Warden that is more meta build, that's able to pull 50k. So you're already looking at about a 15k DPS decrease on a self-buffed Parse. Now, granted, we don't have minor force. Minor force is already provided for us in the Magicka Warden meta build through the Rearming Trap or Chant Acceleration. We were using Spellsim instead, but you have to keep in mind that look at how many times you have to use Spellsim. You have to use it 11 times. So again, drain versus regen is very, very high here on a Frost Warden build here. So just something you just kind of want to keep in mind here. So here is all of our kind of DPS stuff on the Count Metrics report, and here's Icy Conjurer down here doing pretty much very respectable DPS. It deals just a little bit less than what Frost Clench combined does. So these are the two Frost Clench hits. So this is the direct damage component. This is the damage over time component. So you can see that Icy Conjurer is doing, if you add these together, a little bit less than what Frost Clench is able to perform here. Winterborn is normally going to be a little bit lower than this, so that's just something you want to keep in mind. So you do notice that Icy Conjurer, because it is a proc set, you can't have it to crit at all, and the same thing with Iceheart. Iceheart can't crit because it is a proc set as well. So just something to keep in mind. Now we are able to proc Icy Conjurer because we are doing minor maim here. So minor maim is a minor debuff. This is from Chilled, so we're able to basically get Icy Conjurer going whenever we have minor maim hit through our frost damage enchant. Now, in theory, the highest amount of uptime from Icy Conjurer should be around 66% or so. So we are a little bit off with Icy Conjurer because it's only maxed out at 57%. So we are missing a few procs here and there from Icy Conjurer, so we're not going to get 100% uptime, but this is fairly decent nonetheless. So as you can see here, overall DPS is not really that high compared to some other meta builds, or even builds that are not really running the meta but are built more towards the meta. Again, you know, Magicka Wardens are able to pull 50k self-buffed with the more meta setup. So you're giving up a lot of DPS by trying to be, I don't want to say special, but if you want to maximize your ice damage, you are giving up a lot of DPS. So that is it for this build video. If you guys have any questions or comments, please feel free to leave them down in the comment section below, and I'll answer them to the best of my ability. Hope you guys found this video informative, and I'll see you guys in the next dungeon.